That Christmas, my own son looked me in the eye and said, "You are not welcome here." I stood in the doorway of the house I helped pay for, feeling the world crumble inside me. I swallowed hard, held back the tears, and left in silence. But what they didn't know is that every wall, every curtain, every installment of that mortgage had my fingerprints on it. And that night, I began writing the biggest twist of my life. You will understand now why you should never underestimate the silence of a wounded mother. He didn't even need to raise his voice. "Mom, this year it won't work." I kept my cell phone glued to my ear, listening to the silence on the other end. The tree was twinkling in his room. I could see it through the window. Ironic, right? I swallowed hard, feeling the shame inside my chest like someone folding a sheet. The pine scent of the sidewalk brought me old Christmases, laughter that never returns. And there I was, all in one piece, looking at the house I helped pay for, as if I didn't exist. The cold doorknob brought me back to reality. I was at my own son's door. He opened it just enough so that education wouldn't escape, nor affection would enter. "It's better if we avoid conflicts," he said, without looking me in the eye. Conflicts? I thought about the furniture I bought, the bills I paid, the pediatrician I paid. The wind spun the garden lights and made the doorbell jingle by itself. I took half a step back, like someone learning to maintain dignity again. His wife appeared in the background, carrying the porcelain cup I had given her. He smiled in that small way that cuts you inside and pretends to be kind. "Your style doesn't suit my family, you understand."
Got it?
I understand interest, due dates, and transfer receipts. I understand the price of a crib, of a roof that doesn't leak on a rainy morning. But there, at the door, I really understood the value of my silence. I looked at the balcony floor and remembered when I chose those ceramics. "Something light, easy to clean when the little one crawls," I said in the store. At the time, he hugged me tightly. "Mom, without you this wouldn't exist." I nodded, back to the present scene, my eyes filled with the entire past. How naughty life is. The same balcony I planned became a border. And I, on the outside, a stranger to the love that was born from my own body. "Okay then," I said softly, taking care with each word like someone picking up glass from the floor. "I wish you a peaceful Christmas." And I stopped there so as not to bleed any more. My reflection in the glass showed an old woman I didn't quite recognize. Not because of my age, but because of the courage I hadn't yet shown on my face. I held the bag tightly, like someone holding the remains of a hug, and I turned around slowly, so the world wouldn't notice my desire to cry. The street smelled of French toast and memories, double cruelty on a party night. The neighbors' children were practicing a choir, out of tune and beautiful. A dog barked at me, wagging its tail as if greeting me. I responded with a quiet hi, grateful for any kindness. Inside me, my heart beat to the rhythm of an ancient bell, and each bell said, "Don't beg, don't explain, don't come back." At the gate, I sat on the cement bench I had made to rest. I felt in my bag and found the stack of receipts I've been carrying without realizing it. They weigh little in the hand, but weigh heavily on our souls. There are months when we pay with money. There are months when we pay with respect. When one is missing, the other becomes proof of a love that becomes a demand. And I, who never liked court, became a walking archive. Conflict, I repeated, tasting the word bitterly in my mouth. Conflict is denying a seat at the table to someone who has already paid for the entire table. It's like canceling a hug as if it were a service subscription. It is to cut the loop and leave the rope in the hands of the person who held the bridge. I could have screamed, but I preferred to collect every syllable. Those who look at it think it's weakness. I know it's ammunition. My car key glowed in response, a stubborn pinprick of light. I turned it around, the engine started, and another woman woke up with me. Not the one who does everything silently, but the one who writes down dates, values, times. The one that transforms humiliation into a method and tears into a map. On the radio, an old song spoke of promises and returning home. I smiled crookedly. Which house are you going back to, my daughter? Which one? Before putting the car in gear, I looked at the facade once more, slowly. I saw the curtains I had adjusted, falling perfectly, impeccable. I saw the door decoration I bought at the fair, bright red, calling for joy. I saw the light on in the kitchen, where I had already fried a cake for my grandson. And I saw, above all, that none of this gave me entry there. The bill was paid. I wasn't the one who owed. I left without knocking on the door that they never let me go through completely. The asphalt reflected the lights as if it were a Christmas lake. I promised myself a gift, respect with my first and last name. I stepped on the gas, but not out of anger, out of determination. It's different, very different. Behind me, the house shrank in the rearview mirror until it became it. And I followed, taking with me a silence that would not remain silent for long. I walked to the door with measured steps, as if treading on memories. Every tile that gleamed beneath my feet seemed to scream my name. I remembered when I chose that model in the store, thinking about its durability. That way it won't get stained with wine or grease, I said, worried about their future. It was more than just a floor, it was care transformed into solid ground. And now, every detail made me feel like an intruder in the construction itself. I ran my hand over the living room curtain, made of thick, elegant beige fabric. I remembered the day the salesman tried to push a cheaper one on me, but I insisted on that one because it blocked out the morning light well. At the time, my son smiled with satisfaction. "Mom, it was perfect. Thank you." Today, that same fabric fell heavily, like a barrier between us. From behind, I heard muffled laughter. Laughter that no longer belonged to me. The kitchen smelled of fresh spices, even with the door closed. I painted that cabinet light blue myself, to brighten up the room. I spent nights sanding, varnishing, letting each drawer slide smoothly. I remember him tasting the first beans I made on that new stove. "It's delicious, Mom. You always do a great job." A whim that now seemed to have become a disposable memory. I looked up at the ceiling, where I had placed the varnished wood paneling. I wanted it to be cozy, to smell like home. I remember the carpentry shop, the dust sticking to my hands, the high bill. But the result was worth it. Everyone praised the finish. Now, looking from the outside, that ceiling reminded me of a golden prison. Everything I did was proof of my love and my naivety. Even the white baseboards, simple but expensive, carried pieces of my history. I remember when the bricklayer said, "Madam, you didn't need to spend so much on this." But I wanted to give the best because a child deserves the best, right? Today, those details were like sharp knives, cutting through my memory. I felt that every penny I invested came back to me demanding dignity. And the worst part, the charge came from the very blood I generated. In the corner of the room, I saw the leather armchair I bought on credit. It was a tight 12 installments, but I knew he liked comfort. He even joked, "Mom, this sofa is fit for a king." Well, I played the throne, and now I was a subject expelled from the castle. Life has those ironies that no one writes about in motherhood manuals, and each memory threw me deeper into the abyss of contempt. I mentally went through the renovations I paid for: plumbing, painting, windows. Even the backyard had my mark, with the non-slip flooring I suggested. This way the boy can play, without the risk of slipping. Taking care of details has always been my way of loving in silence. But too much silence ends up becoming invisibility, doesn't it? And I, who was the foundation, became the shadow of a forgotten wall. I thought about the electricity, water, and telephone bills, always paid by me. Whole months of sacrifice, cutting from my own plate. How many times have I stopped buying a new dress so I wouldn't be late on my bill? How many nights will I spend planning budgets and praying for it to work? This inventory is not on paper. It is recorded in the flesh and soul. And the soul, my dear, neither forgets nor forgives so easily. I saw myself as an unlikely accountant, carrying invisible statements. Each memory was a line of debt in my memory. Love is priceless, they say, but it always comes with a receipt. And I knew my evidence drawer was full, not just of papers, but of pains that no one dared to calculate. It was my secret inventory, too heavy to keep hidden. At that moment, I felt the door closing behind me. It wasn't just wood, nor just houses. It was the door to my sacrifice, opening wide accounts that no one wanted to acknowledge. I walked away carrying an invisible balance sheet, a ledger of life. And each step was another line in this cruel accounting. But something in me said, soon someone would have to make that change. I got into the car slowly, like someone who knows they're carrying more than just suitcases. The key turned, the engine responded, but inside me there was only silence. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw my tired, almost unrecognizable face. It wasn't just age, it was the weight of years of ignored dedication. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, as if it were the last thing that still obeyed me. And I left, without a destination, just to escape the bitter taste of the closed door. With every kilometer, memories lined up like streetlights on the road. I remembered the down payment on that house, paid for with my effort and sacrifices. From the day I signed the initial check, hands trembling but full of hope, he hugged me tightly, saying that one day he would repay everything. At that moment, I believed that life was fair, that love was enough. Today, the memory tasted like a broken promise. The mortgage payments paraded through my mind like living numbers. Each paid bill smelled of sweat and a bad night's sleep. How many times have I delayed my own bills so as not to fail him? How many anxious calls have I received from the bank, only to be resolved in silence? I was the invisible guarantor, the financial guardian angel. And now, ironically, I've become the unwanted burden in his life. The radio was playing an old song, but I couldn't hear it properly. My head was too busy with values, interest, deadlines. I remembered the credit card I maxed out to buy living room furniture. And the financing of the car he drives today, I pay with my guarantees. How many of his dreams did I support, believing they were also mine? After all, isn't that what mothers do? Conflate their child's future with their own? At the next bend, I felt a hot tear run down my face. It wasn't just sadness, it was disguised anger at myself. How could I have thought that love and money could go hand in hand without any charges? The steering wheel was fogged up with tears, and I had to pull over. I took a deep breath, trying to transform pain into clarity. And deep down, I knew that journey wasn't just about the road. The city lights twinkled in the distance, reminiscent of childhood Christmas, when there were no expensive gifts, but there was true presence. My mother cooked simply, and my father sang out of tune. We laughed at life, without knowing that it was wealth. Today, surrounded by paid bills and purchased souvenirs, I felt poor. Poor in affection, poor in recognition, poor in home. I started off again, determined not to drown in memories. The engine's noise seemed to respond to my accelerated heartbeats. It was as if he too carried the weight of so many emotional debts. Each kilometer traveled was an unspoken confession, a swallowed scream. But pent-up screams don't disappear. They turn into a storm in the chest. And I knew that sooner or later, this storm would have a target. At the red light, I closed my eyes for a moment. I saw the mental list: down payment, renovations, cars, cards, promises. Everything spun like a carousel of emotional debts. And I, in the middle, not knowing if I was a mother or a creditor. My heart hurt more than any late bill. Because a bill is paid, contempt, on the other hand, has no due date. I put it in gear, and for the first time in years, I wasn't in a hurry. Haste has always been my companion in solving everything. Now I drove calmly, savoring the strangeness of the emptiness. It was as if time itself had given me a forced pause. And deep down I knew this pause was a warning of change. But change hurts. It always hurts, especially when it is born of ingratitude. I arrived home, parked, and stood there, without turning off the engine. The headlight illuminated the wall, revealing cracks I'd never noticed. Maybe they were recent, maybe they were always there, hidden. And I realized my life was also full of hidden cracks. But unlike the wall, no one but me could fix it. And in that instant, I decided that my wounded pride would not be buried. It would be seed. I arrived home with my soul still throbbing, and I had barely put my bag down when the phone rang. On the other end, her voice, too sweet to be true. I just wanted to clarify, it's nothing personal, you understand. I remained silent, listening to the justification rehearsed as if it were a graduation speech. She talked about customs, manners, etiquette, as if I were a piece out of place. And I, who washed cloth diapers and hung clothes in the rain, listened in silence. It's just that my parents really value education, she continued. Education? I thought about the times I swallowed my pride so as not to embarrass anyone. In the letters I wrote by hand to ask for an extension of accounts. In the patience of raising a child without complaining about the father's absence. If that wasn't education, then what was? Perhaps, for her, education was just the veneer on porcelain that doesn't break. As she spoke, my hands were sweating, but my voice was steady. I understand, yes. I understand that my place is not with my own family. There was silence on the other end, brief, uncomfortable, almost a stumble. She cleared her throat and tried to sugarcoat it, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was thinking about the cutlery I bought for them to use at their first dinner, and how even the shine of the stainless steel seemed to laugh in my face. The smell of reheated coffee filled the kitchen, reminding me of busy days. How many times have I made coffee for bricklayers renovating their homes? I wanted them to feel good, to work with enthusiasm. I've always believed that what we give to the world comes back to us. But in that connection I realized, not everything comes back. Some things disappear along the way, swallowed up by ingratitude. No need to be hurt, she insisted, almost theatrically. Hurt. Hurt is an understatement. What I felt was a stab with a satin ribbon. The tone was polite, but the words were sharp. She wanted to push me away without carrying guilt, dressed in good manners. And I realized that the worst violence doesn't scream, it smiles. It is in the smile that the sharpest knife is hidden. I looked at my kitchen table and saw bills scattered around. There were extracts, receipts, numbers that didn't lie. 5 years of monthly deposits, each a brick of their future. My sacrifice transformed into a bank statement, invisible to those who only see appearances. While she talked about etiquette, I leafed through receipts. It was like comparing fake gold to the weight of real iron. My heart was beating fast, and for a moment I thought about letting it out. I almost said, "My daughter, I was the one who kept this house standing." But I kept quiet. I realized there was no point in talking with closed ears. Those who don't want to listen turn the truth into an offense. And I wouldn't give her the pleasure of calling me bitter. My silence would be my protest, louder than any scream. When the call ended, I stared at the phone for several long seconds. It still felt hot, as if it had burned my hands. The silence in the house was heavy, almost solid. I sighed deeply, trying to find air between the walls that surrounded me. And I thought, funny how one phone call can change someone's life. Sometimes it's not what they say, but how they say it and what they hide. I got up and went to the bookshelf to get a blue folder. Inside, each voucher was in order, like soldiers lined up. I ran my finger over dates, amounts, electronic signatures. There was my invisible story, stored in cold numbers. As they erased me from the dinner table, I saw myself printed on statements. And I realized my worth was not being measured by truth, but by convenience. At that moment, a flame ignited inside me. It wasn't revenge yet, it was just a warning. I knew that sooner or later, these tests would speak for me. Because receipts don't lie, and time collects debts with high interest. And maybe, who knows, that good manners connection was the trigger. The first ring of the bell that announced the storm that was to come. I spread the papers out on the table like someone putting together a puzzle of pain. Bank statements, transfer receipts, receipts for each installment. 5 years organized in silence, kept as an intimate secret. The bank's cold letters screamed louder than any accusation. Each number was a part of me, taken from my livelihood. And there, before those leaves, I saw my sacrifice transformed into material proof. I ran my fingers over the papers as if caressing a scar. I remembered the night when, broke, I sold an old piece of jewelry to pay off the mortgage. A ring that my late husband had given me for our wedding anniversary. I exchanged memory for a paid bill and never complained. At that time, I thought it was part of the natural cycle of life. Today, I realized that my silence had turned the sentence against me. Each receipt brought a memory, and the memories burned. I had made the deposit the day I got sick, and I still didn't miss it. There was the installment paid in the month my car broke down and I walked. There was the silent loan that I paid off alone so as not to tarnish his name. It was as if each page was written with sweat, tears, and sleepless nights. That table didn't just have papers on it, it had whole pieces of my soul. While I was tidying everything up, I heard the kitchen clock ticking in the background. It seemed to mock my delay in seeing reality. How long did it take me to understand that love cannot be proven with a receipt? But also, how long could I stand believing it was just a phase? I expected recognition, maybe a sincere thank you. What I received was contempt wrapped in good manners. I took one of the statements and stared at the amount, 3,250 Brazilian reals. I remembered that month I myself ran out of medicine to complete the payment. She smiled bitterly, asking, "Who pays the mortgage on my health?" I found no answer, just the tired reflection in the window glass. The paper crumpled between my fingers, betraying my pent-up anger. But even my anger felt too organized, lined up like those numbers. I stacked everything in chronological order, from first tank to last. It was like watching a movie in slow motion, where only I was acting. My son was the beneficiary, but I was the invisible protagonist. Each month was an act, each payment a scene of sacrifice. And I, sitting in that cold kitchen, realized the script of my life. A script written in silence, without an audience, and without applause. I smelled a musty smell coming from the old folder where I kept my receipts. That smell brought back memories of closed drawers and hidden secrets. It was as if even the air wanted to warn me, "You've waited too long." And in that moment, it wasn't just indignation. It was awakening. Life was showing me that the proof was there, right before my eyes. I just had to decide to use it, instead of continuing to swallow resentment. I looked at the table laid with papers, and imagined what it would be like in a courtroom. Not of human justice, but of conscience. There, I would be witness and defendant at the same time, accused of loving too much. And who would be in the dock? Not my son, but my own naivety. It was in this reverie that I realized I needed to change roles. From silent victim to woman who demands what is fair. My mind began to architect possibilities, as if opening doors. These documents could be my shield, my printed voice. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to humiliate myself. I just had to show the sheets, let the numbers speak for me. And for the first time in years, I felt a spark of power within my chest. Small still, but enough to illuminate an approaching decision. I collected each sheet carefully, folding the edges like someone storing ammunition. I put everything in the blue folder, closed it tightly, and placed it on my chest. I felt the weight, not just physical, but symbolic. There was my life of sacrifice, now turned into a witness. And I thought, if they want a silent war, they will get a response to match. The tasting table wasn't just a memory, it was the beginning of something bigger. I opened the bank's website with trembling hands, as if I were about to commit a crime. The blue screen blinked coldly, indifferent to my emotions. I typed password after password, each number reminding me of a piece of my life. In history, there were automatic deposits, faithful as clockwork. 5 years of routine turned into obligation, without recognition. And I, with a heavy heart, knew that I was about to change everything. The cursor was blinking on the cancel recurring transfer option. Small, simple, almost insignificant on the screen. But to me, it felt like a chasm between the past and the future. The finger hovered over the mouse, hesitant, heavy as lead. I thought of my son's face, of the cold words that still echoed. And I remembered. It wasn't me who owed. It was him who owed. I took a deep breath and clicked. A dry sound echoed, barely audible, but deafening inside me. It was the sound of freedom, the crack that breaks invisible chains. The confirmation appeared. Transfer canceled successfully. The simple phrase shone like victory in capital letters. And for the first time in years, I felt like my month was breathing along with me. I closed my eyes and let my body relax in the chair. The silence in the house was no longer oppressive. It was welcoming. It was as if every wall said, "Finally, you chose yourself." An immense weight was lifted from my shoulders, almost physical. The purse, the papers, the statements, nothing held me back anymore. And inside me, a flame lit, discreet but firm. I got up and went to the kitchen to make some fresh coffee. The strong smell invaded the air, mixed with the feeling of victory. It wasn't just ordinary coffee. It was the solitary toast of my new phase. I sat at the table and smiled to myself, something rare these days. I smiled because I understood that freedom is not given, it is taken. And I finally had taken mine. As he drank, flashes of the past came to him like quick scenes. The first deposit was made with enthusiasm, thinking it was temporary. The times he would say, "Mom, you're amazing," only to disappear. Sleepless nights, worried about not missing anything. All of this now seemed distant, as if it were another woman's life. The woman I was no longer existed, and I didn't want her to. I looked at the blue folder still on the table. I no longer felt heaviness, just clarity. She was not a symbol of pain, but of power. I had evidence, I had choices, I had a voice. And most importantly, I had decided to use them. Not at that moment, but when the moment was perfect. I walked across the room and stared at the mirror. I saw wrinkles that I hadn't seen for a long time because before I only saw tiredness. Now, they were wrinkles of history, of struggle, of survival. I ran my hand over my face and realized there was something new in my gaze. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't anger. It was firmness, the certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. I sat back down, and the distant sound of fireworks announced Christmas Eve. People celebrated, toasted, sang. I, alone, also celebrated, but in a different way. I celebrated breaking a cycle, choosing to respect myself. While they were partying without me, I was partying with myself. And perhaps that was the truest celebration of all. I picked up the phone, but not to call. I just placed the device on the table and looked at it calmly. There was nothing to be said yet. The silence spoke for me. I knew that time would collect debts that weren't mine. And when the bill came, they would be unprepared. The liberating click wasn't just a cancellation. It was the beginning of my revenge. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a glass of cheap wine. There was no roast turkey, no children running around, no voices filling the house. Just the ticking of the clock and the timid creaking of the wood on the wall. The silence seemed to want to embrace me, and for the first time, I let it. I toasted the memory of Maria, my life companion, who was no longer here. And I whispered, "Maybe I can still be the man you believed in." The red liquid flowed down hot, heating more than a fireplace. It was strange to feel comfort in the void after so long. I remembered the nights when the house was full, when my son was still little. Laughter echoed through the halls, and even the fights were sweet. Now the same house seemed different, too big for just one heart. But that night, silence was a gift, not a punishment. I pulled out an old photograph of the three of us together at Christmas 1989. Maria smiled in that calm way, and he held the new stroller. I, in the background, looked exhausted but happy. The photo smelled of something stored away, mixed with childhood memories. I brought the portrait closer to the lit candle and let the flame illuminate the faces. It was as if they were looking back at me, saying, "Go ahead, keep going." I closed my eyes and listened to the house breathing. The furniture creaked, the wind whistled through the cracks in the window. It was a silent orchestra, different from the noise I knew. And in this intimate concert, I understood that loneliness is not always the enemy. Sometimes, it is the blanket that protects us from human coldness. Sometimes, she's the only one left when everyone else turns their backs. I remembered Maria telling me, "Don't lose yourself trying to save everyone." At the time, I thought it was an exaggeration, something for a sensitive heart. But now, those words sounded like prophecy. I lost myself supporting dreams that weren't mine. I lost myself holding up walls that now expelled me. And in the midst of that silence, I began to find myself. With each sip of wine, the feeling of relief grew. Not because everything was resolved, but because I had taken the first step. It was as if the click in the bank still echoed inside me. A simple decision, but one that changed the entire tone of the night. Before, I would be the forgotten victim at other people's dinner. Now I was the host of myself, celebrating my own courage. I missed the smell of roast turkey, I confess. But instead, there was the scent of the candle burning slowly. The crackling of the wax reminded me that time passes, but leaves marks. And I realized that my life was about to be redesigned. No longer with borrowed paint, but with my own colors. And the first color was the intense red of that lonely wine. I ran my hand over the wood of the table, marked by old scratches. How many times has that tabletop sustained parties, laughter, and hearty dishes? Today, he was only holding stored papers and a glass of wine. But I realized it wasn't little. It was enough to start over. Because it's not the number of people at the table that defines the party. It is the quality of what we carry within us. The wind blew hard, knocking over a forgotten picture frame on the shelf. I picked it up from the floor and saw another old photo. Maria on the beach, her hair blowing in the wind. I felt as if she had visited me at that moment. I smiled at the image and said to myself, "You would have been proud of me today." And suddenly, the emptiness of the room wasn't empty, it was silent presence. A silence that was warmer than any distant hug. That night, I understood that I didn't need to wait for applause, nor beg for an invitation to a table that didn't want me. My life didn't fit into polite excuses or fake smiles. It fit into firm decisions, like the one I had made. And for the first time in years, I felt like I owned myself. The silence that warmed was also the flame that announced new steps. The next morning the phone rang too early. It was her, the same rehearsed voice, only now filled with haste. "Could you pick up my parents from flight 447 at 2 p.m.? That would be a big help." I listened as if listening to an order, not a request. I took a deep breath, swallowed the irony, and replied softly, "Sure, no problem." I hung up without letting out the bitter laughter that was building inside me. I kept looking at the clock all morning. Each pointer seemed to mock my usual obedience. The old habit said, "Get dressed, go do it." But the new voice inside me whispered, "Don't go." That voice sounded strange, but also liberating. And for the first time, I decided to listen to instinct, not obligation. At 1:30 p.m., instead of grabbing the car keys, I sat in the armchair. The leather creaked under my weight, reminding me that it was still my home. I picked up an old book, but I didn't read a single line. I stood there, motionless, feeling time pass like silent revenge. I imagined the airport full, suitcases rolling, announcements on the loudspeaker, and I absent, busy existing only for myself. At 2 p.m., promptly, I made some coffee. The strong smell filled the air, mixing with my feeling of victory. It was like toasting my silent rebellion. Meanwhile, his in-laws must have been running around with their suitcases, impatient, waiting for me, the luxury nanny they always considered available. But no, this time there was no car, no smile, no sacrifice. The phone rang again later, with a raised voice. They were waiting at the airport. What happened? I was silent, letting the weight of the words fall on the other end of the line. Then I replied simply, "There must have been some misunderstanding." Nothing more. No explanation, no blame. And I hung up, feeling like I had won an invisible battle. I got up and opened the window, letting the wind hit my face. It was as if the fresh air washed away the remnants of submission. Outside, life went on as normal. Children playing, neighbors passing by. But inside me, a whole world was moving. I had discovered that disobeying can also be an act of self-love. And this discovery warmed me more than any external approval. I sat back down and stared at the clock on the wall. I didn't feel late, for the first time in years. It was as if time had become mine again, not theirs. The ticking sounded different, no longer a demand, but freedom. I thought, how many times have I been a driver, a nurse, a maid disguised as a mother? And I realized it would never be again. The afternoon passed slowly, with the taste of a debut. I cooked for myself, without thinking about pleasing anyone. Each spoonful of rice seemed to be seasoned with a little bit of grit. I ate slowly, like someone savoring victory with every bite. The silent kitchen seemed to applaud in echo, and I, for the first time, applauded myself too. When night came, I imagined their dinner, full of ugly faces. They probably called me irresponsible, ungrateful, even crazy. But it didn't matter anymore. They could invent whatever label they wanted. I knew I had taken a step from which there was no turning back. And deep down, I liked the idea of having kept everyone waiting. It was my little revenge, sweet as stored wine. I fell asleep with a light heart, something rare in those days. The pillow felt softer, the bed more cozy. I dreamed that I was walking alone through an empty airport, but smiling. He didn't carry any bags. He didn't wait for anyone. He just followed. I woke up with the taste of the dream still in my mouth, firm as a promise. And I realized, by not going to the airport, I finally came to myself. The next morning, I heard loud knocking at the gate. It was them, in-laws, daughter-in-law, and even my son, all together, in an uproar. The voices clashed, furious, filled with indignation. I opened the door calmly, as if I was already expecting the storm. "How could you leave us waiting at the airport?" she shouted. I responded with silence, just looking at each face like a broken mirror. They entered without asking permission, throwing sharp words around the room. My son, with hard eyes, tried to hold the pose. "You crossed the line, Mom. That was humiliating." Humiliation? I smiled, remembering nights I spent crying alone. They spoke loudly, but inside me there was only peace. The peace of someone who had nothing left to lose. The kitchen porcelain was the first to suffer. She, in a rage, grabbed my favorite cup and threw it against the wall. The crack echoed through the house, like thunder announcing a storm. White chunks scattered across the floor, like teeth fallen from a giant. I looked at the fragments and thought, it's not just porcelain that's breaking. It's the whole illusion that's shattering before me. I looked around a room, filled with chaos. The picture frame on the floor, the vase knocked over, furniture dragged. It was as if they wanted to erase my presence by force. But instead of fear, I felt a firmness rise within me. My home was not a theater setting for rage attacks. My home was the last space where I still reigned. Enough! I screamed in the loudest voice I had ever heard. Everyone stopped, surprised, as if they had never heard me like that. My son opened his mouth, but found no words. I stood there, firm, with burning eyes and erect posture. I didn't tremble. I didn't back down. I didn't beg. It was the end of the submissive version of myself. I pointed to the door with a slow, calculated gesture. "This house is mine. You only enter when I allow it." The sentence came out heavy, laden with years of accumulated silence. They looked at each other in disbelief, as if they didn't recognize me. And in fact, they didn't recognize me. I was also new to them, a novelty that was born amidst the fury. They grumbled, huffed, shuffled their steps to the gate. My daughter-in-law still wanted to throw one more poisonous word, but my look was enough to shut her mouth for the first time. The storm left in a row, like defeated soldiers. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was a victorious silence, not one of submission. I looked at the broken pieces of porcelain scattered across the floor. I knelt down slowly and picked up some pieces with my fingertips. And I thought, nothing fairer than starting from scratch with my own hands. Each fragment cut, but also freed. It was as if I was collecting parts of myself, scattered throughout life. And for the first time, it didn't hurt as much. I got up, swept up the pieces, and threw them away without looking back. As the trash swallowed the remains of the cup, I felt relief. It was just porcelain after all, but it symbolized so much more. It was the end of a cycle where I accepted being broken in silence. Now, whoever broke it didn't hurt me, they just revealed themselves. And I learned that even the cracks of destruction can sound like music. I sat in the armchair, exhausted but serene. The wind blew in through the open window, cooling the heat of the battle. I closed my eyes and let the breeze carry away the last remnants of fear. I knew that storm would not be the last, but I also knew that from then on, I would be ready for them all. Because once the porcelain cracks, the house is never the same again. 2 days later, the neighbor brought the newspaper folded under her arm. "Have you seen this?" he asked, his eyes downcast, almost apologetic. I picked up the local news section, and there it was, my photo on page 3. The headline painted me as an ungrateful villain, abandoning my family at Christmas. My stomach felt churning, as if I had swallowed poison. It wasn't enough to throw me out of the house. Now they wanted to crucify me in the public square. The article described a distorted version, full of half-truths. He was talking about a mother who refused to support her struggling son. I omitted every deposit, every bill paid, every sleepless night. There, I was just the portrait of a bitter old woman, incapable of forgiving. The newspaper turned my pain into a cheap spectacle, and my silence in guilt. I held the paper tightly, almost tearing the edges. The smell of fresh paint made me sick, mixed with the taste of injustice. I saw my name printed, as if it were a mark of shame, and I thought of Maria, my companion, who would never accept it in silence. "Don't let them erase your truth," she always said. At that moment, his words burned like an order. The neighbor tried to console me, but I barely listened. My memories came like violent waves. Every receipt I kept screamed louder than that lying headline. The difference is that the receipts were in my drawer, hidden, while the lie was printed for all to read. It was an unequal war, but I didn't intend to lose. I went out to buy bread, and the looks were as heavy as stones. Some looked away, others stared in silence. Gossip runs fast when it finds fuel, and I became gossip fodder, a perfect dish for sharp tongues. Every step seemed to echo the headline, but deep down I knew the truth was still with me. In the evening I sat at the table and spread out my papers again. This time, not as a souvenir, but as an arsenal. There was my defense, my voice, my salvation. There was no need to invent anything. It was enough to show what was already fact. And I asked myself, how long would I remain silent, letting others write my story? Maybe it was time to take the pen back. The phone rang, but I ignored it. I knew it was him, or maybe her, trying to maintain control of the narrative. I wouldn't answer, not anymore. The insistent noise echoed like a provocation, but I didn't give in. It was strange to feel pleasure in denying a connection. Small victories also taste sweet. I took the scissors and cut out the article from the newspaper. I pasted it into a folder next to the receipts. I wanted it to be recorded so that I would never forget the war that was declared. The yellowed paper would one day fade, but my memory would not. Every lying line was fuel for my next step, and I was already starting to plan my response. I looked in the mirror and saw a tired but glowing face. She wasn't the defeated woman they wanted to portray. It was someone being reborn, even in the midst of mud. I smiled slightly, not out of happiness, but out of challenge. The truth may take time, but it always finds its way. And I was ready to be the guide on that path. That night I slept little, but I dreamed big. I dreamed of a table full of people, each one reading my tests. I dreamed of whispers falling silent in the face of printed truth. I dreamed of looks that once accused, now lowered in shame. I woke up with my heart racing, knowing that this dream could turn into a plan. And I realized the attack in the newspaper didn't destroy me. It woke me up. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The newspaper was still on the table, like a bitter memory. I looked at him and smiled at him. It wouldn't be my final sentence. I got up, made myself a strong coffee, and opened my blue briefcase. There were my silent allies, receipts, statements, dates. And I decided that I would not face the lie with shouts, but with method. I started by separating the documents by year. 2018, 2019, 2020. Each stack was a chapter of my life. I hand-wrote little notes next to it. Mortgage, card, doctor. My sacrifice took shape, becoming a tangible chronology. While others relied on gossip, I had solid evidence. And that difference gave me confidence. I spent the afternoon rummaging through old folders and shoeboxes. I found forgotten receipts, even from supermarket purchases. Everything that showed how much I supplied what they couldn't or didn't want to pay for. Each paper had the smell of the past, some yellowed with time. But even faded, they were irrefutable witnesses. I wasn't alone. The numbers were on my side. I took out my brown notebook and began to write. Line by line, I organized a financial diary. January, deposit 3,200 Brazilian reals. February, loan paid. It was almost a war accounting, detailed, precise. I felt like I was mounting not just a defense, but an accusation. And that gave me a secret, almost forbidden pleasure. The noise from the street came muffled through the window, but I couldn't hear anything. My head was immersed in calculations, dates, memories. Each value written down gave me back a piece of my self-esteem. It was as if I were saying, "See? I didn't invent anything." It was liberating to transform pain into a document, and I felt like a strategist for the first time. I remembered my husband who always said, "Keep everything, you'll need it one day." At the time, I thought it was an exaggeration. Now, he understood that his voice echoed like advice from beyond. The papers kept in silence were my inheritance of wisdom, and I thanked him in my thoughts, feeling his presence there with me, as if he himself held my hands firmly over the receipts. That night, I reviewed every detail carefully. I put notes in separate envelopes, marked with names and dates. It was tiring work, but each step made me stronger. I was no longer the humiliated mother. I was the woman preparing her counterattack. And my enemy was not just my son, but the lie that surrounded him. A lie that, sooner or later, would crumble under the weight of the truth. I closed the blue folder and placed it against my chest. I felt my heart beat calmer, almost in tune with the paper. It was as if the documents lent me their silent strength. There was no need to rush. Time was on my side. They laughed today, but they would laugh less when they saw each piece of evidence. And I would be ready for the exact moment to reveal it. Before going to sleep, I wrote on a blank sheet of paper, "The truth doesn't need to run. It just needs to resist." I tacked it to the refrigerator door as a daily reminder. There was my motto, my new prayer. And as I turned out the light, I felt proud for the first time in a long time. Proud of myself, of my method, of my reborn courage. I went to bed certain that that war would not be won with anger, but with strategy, patience, and indisputable evidence. I didn't need to raise my voice. I just had to show the numbers. And when the moment came, every eye would bow before the truth. I closed my eyes smiling, imagining the scene, and I slept peacefully, knowing that my counterattack was already underway. Christmas Eve arrived filled with tension, but inside I was calm. I spent the entire day reviewing the documents like someone sharpening a sword. Each extract was copied into new folders, one for each guest at their dinner. I used white envelopes, unmarked, but heavy as shelved truths. As I folded the papers, I thought, what better gift than reality? And she smiled to herself, savoring the irony. I went to the closet and stared at the suit that had been stored away for years. It was the same one I wore to my son's wedding, when he still looked at me with pride. I ran my hand over the worn fabric, remembering the joy of that night. At the time, I dreamed of future family dinners, all together. Now, that same suit would be a battle uniform. The contrast made me take a deep breath and look at the mirror with new eyes. As I was getting dressed, I heard church bells in the distance. Each chime seemed to mark a step towards my decision. There was no tremor in my hands, just a steady state. It was strange to feel serenity amidst the chaos. But I understood that, When we've already lost everything, there's nothing left to fear. And I wasn't afraid. I was ready to face their bright hall. I sat in the living room and practiced the words I would say. There would be no outbursts, no screams, no hurt feelings. They would be cold, indisputable facts, delivered calmly. I even trained my breathing so as not to tremble in the face of judging looks. The voice needed to come out clear, like a hammer hitting the table. And deep down, I knew that my greatest weapon would be the silence between sentences. In the afternoon, I prepared little Christmas cards. I wrote short sentences. With love, the truth always appears. I placed each card next to the envelopes, as if they were gifts. I wish every person would open it, read it, and think twice. There was no need to convince anyone. It was enough to plant doubts. And the doubts would do the work for me. As the sun set, I looked out the window and saw children setting off fireworks. The streets smelled like dinner, a mix of turkey, garlic, and rosemary. For a moment, I almost cried from longing for the old Christmases. But the memory didn't make me weaken. It only reinforced my resolve. If they chose to erase my presence, I would choose to illuminate my truth. And it would be precisely on that eve that the game would change. I patiently fixed my hair and adjusted my handkerchief in my suit pocket. With every detail, I seemed to transform from victim to protagonist. There was no luxury in my preparation, but there was dignity. And dignity, I realized, always wears better than any expensive fabric. I looked in the mirror again and recognized myself for the first time in years. Not as a forgotten mother, but as a woman ready to fight. I put the envelopes in an antique leather briefcase, an inheritance from my husband. He used it to carry contracts at work, and now I would do the same. It was as if he walked with me, invisible but present. I gripped the handle firmly, feeling weight and protection. It wasn't just paper I was carrying, it was justice in dossier form. And with her, I couldn't back down. On the table, I left a candle lit before leaving. Not out of superstition, but as a symbol. The flame would stay there, guarding the house, reminding me of my choice. It was as if to say, "Go, and do not fear the darkness of others." I turned off the lights, closed the door, and took a deep breath in the dark. The night was not one of celebration, but of confrontation. As I walked to my car, I heard Christmas music in the distance. The voices seemed to mock, but also to announce my arrival. It was as if the whole world knew what was about to happen. And inside me, my heart was beating fast, but not with fear. It was the compass of courage, guiding my steps towards the inevitable. The eve was set, and I would be the protagonist of the revelation. I arrived at the illuminated house, and the street looked like a postcard scene. Parked cars, cheerful voices, the smell of dinner escaping through the windows. For a moment, my heart skipped a beat, but then I took a deep breath. I held the leather briefcase against my chest, like an invisible shield. This time, I wouldn't enter from the side, as if asking for permission. This time, she would walk through the main door, as the owner of her own story. The conversations fell silent as I walked through the gate. Some eyes looked up, others looked away, feigning naturalness. My daughter-in-law tried to force a smile, but the mask was trembling. My son, motionless, seemed to not believe the audacity. With each step, I felt the ground firm, as if it were a walkway of courage. Their silence was music to my ears. On the table, I saw delicately marked places. New china, shiny glasses, folded linen napkins. It was a perfect spectacle, but I could see the cracks. Because no amount of expensive china can cover the truth for long. I placed the folder on the table like someone laying down playing cards. And the dry noise echoed, commanding respect. "Good evening, everyone," he said calmly, as if starting a toast. My voice did not tremble, nor did it seek approval. It was clear, clean, and made every eye turn to me. I distributed envelopes like someone distributing slices of bread. Each guest received his portion of truth in silence, and I, unhurriedly, savored the discomfort in the air. My daughter-in-law tried to interrupt. "This is absurd." I raised my hand, asking for silence with a simple gesture. I didn't come to argue. I came to show. And with those words, I opened the first envelope. Extracts slid across the table, sliding like blades. The dates and values spoke louder than any justification. The buzz began, low voices, papers passing from hand to hand. Some guests frowned, others widened their eyes in shock. The embarrassment spread like wildfire in a dry field. I watched silently, letting each number burn slowly. I didn't need a fiery speech. The evidence was my speech. And every glance that turned their way was my silent victory. My son cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Mom, this is not the time or place." I looked down at the papers and then back up at him. The right moment is when lies try to take the place of truth. The air seemed to grow heavier, and even the candles on the table flickered. No one dared interrupt again. Each guest compared dates, added up values, and did quick calculations. Some whispered, "But did she pay for all that?" Others just looked at me with a mixture of respect and surprise. I saw expressions change, masks fall in real time. The narrative they had sustained for years was crumbling before their watchful eyes, and there was no way to pick up the pieces of the farce. I leaned back in my chair, unhurriedly, and let the silence speak for me. There was no need to humiliate, nor to accuse. The mere exposure was enough to turn the tables. The dinner that was supposed to be the stage for my exclusion became the stage for my revelation. And I finally found myself at the center, not as an unwanted guest, but as the owner of the word that no one could silence. When I finished handing out the last few envelopes, I lifted the bowl of water. I didn't toast to Christmas, nor to the fake family reunion. I toasted to the memory of Maria and to the man I decided to be again. The silence still reigned, heavy, full of sidelong glances. But inside me, there was lightness, because I knew that front door would never close in front of me again. The first few minutes after the envelopes were delivered were filled with pure embarrassment. People read, reread, exchanged papers like passing a secret from hand to hand. The sound of cutlery ceased, and even the wine seemed to lose its taste in their mouths. My daughter-in-law tried to smile, but the corner of her mouth was trembling nervously. My son cleared his throat, fiddling with the collar of his shirt, avoiding looking at the guests. Little by little, the veneer of perfection began to chip away at everyone. "This proves nothing," she shouted, her voice louder than necessary. But one of the uncles immediately replied, "Prove it. The dates and amounts are here." The silence that followed was like a slap in the face. My daughter-in-law turned red, lost, without an argument. My son, pale, tried to gather strength to regain control. But authority flowed from him like water through his fingers. One of the cousins looked at me with teary eyes. "We always knew you helped, but we never imagined it would be so much." I swallowed hard, without showing any emotion, because that wasn't the moment. I needed to maintain my posture, firm, without giving space to sentimentality. The game was not one of tenderness, but of facts exposed in public. And each innocent sentence of theirs was another blow against the mask. I saw my son break out in a cold sweat. He tried to laugh, but it sounded fake, strangled. With each sheet of paper that passed from hand to hand, his image as an independent man was shattered. The lie he maintained before others no longer had any support. It was like watching a house of cards crumble in slow motion. And I just watched, silently, the inevitable collapse. "You set all this up to humiliate us," my daughter-in-law accused, her eyes flashing. But a lady next to her replied, "No, my dear. This is just the truth." Her face contorted, trying to maintain her composure. But the farce no longer found room to breathe. And in that moment I realized, those who shout the loudest are those who fear silence the most. And the silence of the room screamed at them. My son finally spoke, but his voice was no longer firm. "She's exaggerating. Mom always helps." But it wasn't like that. One of the cousins held up the paper in his hand. "Here it is, electronic signature. It's from the bank." The words fell like a hammer, crushing his last defense. He swallowed hard, looked away, and lowered his head. The mask, finally, was cracked from end to end. I felt like crying, but I held back. It was not the time to show weakness, but to stand firm. I let the environment do the work for me. The glances, the comparisons, the stifled whispers, all served as testimony. And I realized I didn't need a fiery speech. The scene was already the trial itself, and I had already won. The children, oblivious to the tension, ran down the hallway. The contrast struck me hard. Innocence in the midst of war. I remembered when my son was that age, running around in the backyard. I protected him from everything, from everyone, believing he would be a man of value. Seeing the man curled up in the chair now was like seeing two different lives. And it hurt, even in the midst of victory. I took a deep breath, looked at the table, and decided not to prolong it. There was no need to crush anyone, just show the truth. The crack was already there, visible to everyone, irreparable. What was once social pride was now collective shame. And shame doesn't go away easily. It sticks like a stain on fine porcelain. And I knew that stain would never be erased. I lifted the glass of water and raised it slightly, in a discreet gesture. "Let's toast Christmas, then. May each one reap what they sow." The words fell heavily, echoing around the entire table. No one dared to respond, neither with a smile nor with a toast. Only silence filled the space, thick as smoke. And in that silence, their mask broke completely. The glass of water was still in my hand when I slowly stood up. The sound of the chair scraping echoed as a warning. All eyes turned to me, some scared, others embarrassed. I took a step forward, feeling the weight of the decision I was about to announce. I looked at each face, lingering longest on the two that hurt me the most. And in a calm voice, I said the phrase I had been holding on to for years. "This is the last toast I'll pay for." The silence became absolute, as if even the clock had stopped. Some swallowed hard. Others tried to hide it by looking at their plates. My daughter-in-law opened her mouth, but found no words. My son stood still, eyes fixed on the glass in front of him. It was as if the phrase had crossed the entire room and hit home. I knew it. They had just lost their footing. "For years, I have supported this roof, this table, this life," I continued. "But today, here in front of everyone, I close this chapter." My voice didn't tremble, and each word fell like a hammer on the table. I saw some relatives nodding their heads silently in approval. Others just watched, surprised by my unexpected firmness. But no one dared to interrupt. I raised the glass once more, this time towards the void, in memory of Mary, who taught me not to beg for affection. I took a sip, feeling the bitter liquid go down like release. The table, once a stage for false pride, was now a silent tribunal. And every sip of water tasted tastier than any expensive wine. Because in that toast, I was toasting myself. My son murmured, "Mom, it doesn't have to be this way." I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see the boy I raised. I saw the man who chose to exclude me, hurt me, and reduce me to nothing. Yes, you do, I replied firmly, without looking away. It was as if my whole life had prepared me for that sentence. And she left with the weight of a definitive sentence. I placed the cup on the table and closed the document folder. I left nothing behind, not even a leaf. Everything that belonged to me came back with me, as it should have always been. As I was collecting, I heard the muffled sound of whispering. But I didn't care. It didn't affect me anymore. My cycle of submission had ended there in front of everyone. I turned around and walked to the door with firm steps. The whole room seemed to follow me with their eyes, but no one stood up. The lights twinkled on the walls, reflecting Christmas colors. But for me, it was like a farewell light. I put my hand on the doorknob, took a deep breath, and opened it. The cool night air entered, bringing relief and rebirth. Behind me, the party collapsed into silence. No one toasted, no one smiled. No one dared to revive the atmosphere. I knew my departure had left a trail that was impossible to erase. Their Christmas would never be remembered for the turkey or the wine. It would be remembered as the night the truth walked through the front door. And he left with me, without asking permission. I walked to the car with the moon lighting my way. The leather briefcase felt lighter now, like a mission accomplished. With each step, I felt the weight of humiliation dissolve into the ground. It was as if, finally, I had returned the burden that was never mine. And for the first time in years, I drove without rushing, without pain, without heartache. Because I knew that the last paid gift had also been my first free step. I got home, left the folder on the table, and stared at the still-lit candle. The flame danced calmly, as if welcoming me. I sat in the armchair, exhausted, but with my heart at peace. I smiled to myself, not in victory over them, but in victory over myself. That night marked the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. And the last toast I paid for was also the first of my new life. Months after that silent dinner, life went on, but not for them. One morning, while I was drinking my coffee, I heard the postman knocking on their gate. I saw from afar the white envelope with the bank's letterhead, unmistakable. I recognized the weight of those letters. I had received many in my life. My heart almost jumped, but not out of pity, out of confirmation. Default, finally, knocked on the right door. I soon learned from the neighborhood that delays were piling up. The mortgage payments, which were previously invisible because I paid them, have now become monsters. My son ran to the phone, tried to negotiate, but interest has no heart. My daughter-in-law, always elegant, now hid dark circles behind makeup. The neighbors' whispers reached me like the wind carrying a message. And each message was a reminder. The truth comes sooner or later. One afternoon, when I opened my mailbox, I found a mistake. The bank had sent me a copy of the notice, since I was the guarantor. The cold words were there. Payment overdue. Regularize immediately. I held the paper and felt the irony cut deep. For years, these bills would arrive, and I would rush to pay them. Now I could fold the letter and keep it as proof of freedom. I ran my fingers over the manager's signature. The same name that called me so many times asking for an immediate solution. I remembered my haste in not letting my son be branded as a debtor. And he smiled bitterly, because now he would have to face this mark alone. It wasn't revenge, it was consequence. And the consequence is that she is the toughest teacher there is. Every week, new envelopes arrived. I saw the papers piling up. I saw the bank officers' visits. I saw their car being towed away on a cold morning, without fanfare. It was like watching a movie I already knew, but this time from the audience. I was no longer on stage, carrying the heaviest lines. I watched calmly, like someone who knows that justice will appear sooner or later. One day, I met my daughter-in-law at the market. She tried to go straight ahead, but our baskets crossed in the hallway. Her eyes, red from crying, didn't hold mine. "I hope you're happy now," she whispered, venom in her voice. I looked straight at him and replied, "I'm not happy. I'm at peace. It's different." She lowered her head and left without looking back. My son, days later, appeared at my door. The haggard face, the unkempt beard, the weight of shame on his shoulders. He was carrying one of those same envelopes in his hand, crumpled. "Mom, I can't do this anymore. I need your help." For a second, my heart faltered, remembering the boy I raised. But soon reason dawned. It was not my burden to carry. I asked him to sit down and let the silence weigh heavily. He began to speak quickly, as if afraid of missing his chance. He talked about the delays, the pressure from the bank, the fear of losing his house. I just listened, without interrupting, without rushing to resolve. The clock seemed to tick every beat of my self-control. And with every word he said, I remembered the click that set me free. When he finished, he lowered his head, waiting for my answer. I took a deep breath and said, "Son, it's not my account. It's yours." He looked at me with teary eyes, but didn't protest. I knew there was no more room for emotional blackmail. I was no longer the mother who put out fires. She was the woman who learned to let the fire show who she really is. That night, alone at home, I thought a lot. Not about their debt, but about my own story. I understood that the default notice was not just for him. It was also for me, a warning that I no longer owed anyone anything. I paid my share, with love, sweat, and sacrifice. And now the rest of the bill was theirs, not mine. He returned a few weeks later, but he was not the same man. His slumped shoulders betrayed his defeat, and his eyes no longer had any sparkle. He entered slowly, asking permission like a stranger in his own home. I sat in the armchair and just watched, without offering a hug. He was the one who needed to speak, not me. And when he opened his mouth, his voice came out trembling, almost a whisper. "Mom, I was wrong." The sentence hung in the air, heavy, unprecedented. He had never admitted fault. He always wore the cloak of reason. But now, faced with ruin, there was no hiding it. He said that the bank threatened to take the house, that his friends were moving away, and that he no longer knew how to support his own choices. As he spoke, I saw flashes of the boy he once was. The boy who ran around the yard, barefoot, asking for orange juice. The teenager who promised to take care of me when I was old. Where did this boy get lost on the way? The question was hammering, but I didn't let it slip out of my mouth. I just listened because at that moment confession was everything. He began to cry, a suppressed cry of a broken man. The tears flowed quickly, as if racing against lost time. "I'm ashamed, Mother, ashamed of what I did to you." I looked at that face marked by defeat and felt a lump in my throat. It wasn't easy to see my own blood imploding before me. But it wasn't easy to forget the wounds he left me either. I just wanted to be recognized, to show that I could do it alone. The irony hurt. He was never alone. I was the one who caught your falls, even when you pushed me out. Now the masks had fallen, and only the naked truth remained. That man before me was not my enemy. It was my son on the edge of the abyss, asking for ground. Can I go back home? Can I start over from here? The words were spoken with such pain that for a moment my heart faltered. But I took a deep breath and let reason temper instinct. Home is not just walls, it is respect, it is truth, it is love. And he gave me none of this when I needed it most. I couldn't just open the door and pretend nothing happened. I got up and walked to the window, without looking at him. The cold wind blew against my face, clearing my thoughts. I remembered every lonely night, every swallowed tear. I remembered the broken cup, the cruel headlines, the accusing looks. And I realized that forgiveness doesn't mean erasing history. It means learning not to repeat it. Son, I love you. But love is not synonymous with eternal salvation. The sentence came out firmly, harsher than I expected. He looked at me with wide eyes, as if he didn't understand. You need to start over, but on your own 2 feet. I didn't offer shortcuts or magic solutions. I offered only the naked, painful truth. He lowered his head, sobbing once more. I don't know if I can, Mom. The desire to hug was there, latent, burning in his hands. But I stood firm because I knew that if I gave in, I would go back to the cycle. And I couldn't go back, not after I had freed myself. It was up to him to decide whether he would fall or learn to fly. That night ended with no answers, just the weight of silence. He walked out slowly, like someone carrying stones in their pockets. I stood in the doorway, watching until it disappeared into the darkness. The heart ached, but the mind was at peace, because I understood that sometimes the truest love doesn't hold on, it lets go. And letting go, although cruel, was the only way to truly save them. Days later, he returned, but this time with a different expression. There was no more arrogance, no mask, no pose. His gaze showed only tiredness and true regret. He sat in the same armchair where he had cried before, but in silence. I stood before him, firm, waiting for him to be the first to speak. And he, almost without a voice, said, "Mom, I don't deserve it, but I need your forgiveness." The words hit deep, stirring my insides. I remembered every wound, every sleepless night, every humiliation. But I also remembered the boy I brought into the world, the one I carried in my arms. My heart swung between sorrow and maternal instinct. It wasn't simple. It's never simple when it comes to blood. Forgiving was possible, forgetting impossible. I looked at him firmly and said, "I forgive you, son." I saw relief spring into his eyes like rain on dry land. But before I could take a deep breath, I added, "I forgive you as a mother, but I will not support your mistakes again." The joy on his face wavered, turned to confusion, and I realized that the lesson still needed to be reinforced. Forgiveness is not a return to the past, I continued. It's liberation, for me and for you. He lowered his head, perhaps hoping for lighter conditions. But there was no room for retreat. I had already closed the door on the dependency loop, and I was willing to keep it locked away. "I want to prove that I've changed," he insisted, almost pleading. "Then prove it with your actions," I replied, dryly but fairly. "Respect, responsibility, and truth. That's all I ask." It was strange to hear my own voice so confident. For years, I was the woman who gave in, who covered, who let go. Now it was the woman who set limits. He tried to argue. "But Mom, what if I can't do it alone?" "You can do it," I replied firmly, "because now you have no more crutches to lean on." I saw the tear fall, and it wasn't just from pain, it was from fear. But I also saw a thread of strength emerge there. Perhaps the same thread that I myself grabbed when I decided to free myself. Silence filled the room, heavy but necessary. He understood that there would be no negotiation, that my forgiveness was not a passport to comfort. It was just a chance to start clean, no excuses. And for the first time, I felt like I had really taught something. Not with sweet words, but with the firmness that life demands. I stood up, put my hand on his shoulder, and said, "You are my son, and always will be. But from now on, you will walk on your own 2 feet." He stood up slowly, still confused, but less hunched over. It felt lighter, like someone receiving a harsh but fair sentence. We said goodbye with a short, almost awkward hug, but it was a hug of new beginnings, not of dependence. When he left, I watched out the window until he disappeared around the corner. My heart ached, of course, but I also smiled silently. I had forgiven, but without imprisoning myself again. He had reached out, but without carrying the weight for it. And I understood what true love is. Firm, but liberating. Forgiving without backing down was my greatest act of courage. That night, before going to sleep, I thanked Maria in my thoughts. She would have been proud of my posture, I knew. I felt his light presence, as if he were silently applauding me. And I closed my eyes in peace, knowing I had given him what he needed. Not the comfort of money, but the truth of the limit. And it was this limit that, finally, could save him from the abyss. After so many years of being absent, I started to look at my home with different eyes. The cracks in the wall were no longer a sign of neglect, but of a new beginning. I painted every corner with my own hands, choosing bright colors. I replaced heavy curtains with light fabrics that let the light in. It was as if each brushstroke was a gesture of freedom. And with each move, I rebuilt not only the house, but also myself. I started fixing little things that I didn't notice before. A broken vase, a loose lock, a dripping faucet. As I adjusted each detail, I thought, I'm fixing myself first. They weren't just repairs, they were symbols. Symbols that I would no longer wait for someone to take care of me. The house became a reflection of the strength I discovered within my chest. I started walking again in the mornings, something I had abandoned. The cold air on my face reminded me that there was still life to be breathed. He greeted neighbors and stopped to watch the children playing ball. Little things that I didn't notice before, suffocated by the weight of routine. Now, every step was light. Every look was discovery. I finally relearned how to be present in my own time. I accepted invitations that I previously refused out of embarrassment or tiredness. I went to my neighbor's birthday party, to the church tea party, and even to the Sunday market. There, I laughed at simple jokes, tried corn cake, and danced without caring. I felt the shy joy return, like a visitor arriving unannounced. And I realized that the world had not abandoned me. I had hidden myself. Now, I myself opened the doors for life to enter again. In the solitude of the nights, I stopped crying for what I lost. I started writing in a notebook, recording small victories. The garden bloomed. I made my favorite dish. I laughed until my stomach hurt. These short sentences were like seeds that germinated in me. When I reread it, I felt proud of the path I was taking. It was proof that getting back on your feet doesn't need applause, just constancy. I also tidied up my wardrobe. I separated old clothes that no longer suited the woman I was now. I donated coats, dresses, shoes that weighed more than they warmed. Instead, I bought simple pieces but chosen by me for me. Getting dressed stopped being an obligation and became a celebration. Every tissue on her body was a reminder. You chose yourself again. The afternoons began to taste like freedom. I played loud music while I cooked, without fear of disturbing anyone. I danced alone among the pots, laughing at my own clumsiness. The smell of food mingled with the smell of silent victory. It wasn't a banquet to impress. It was a meal to nourish me. And for the first time, I felt like the table was mine alone, and that was enough. True friends reappeared, as if they were waiting for my call. They knocked on the door, brought stories, hugs, long conversations. They didn't ask about the ingratitude I suffered. They just celebrated my presence. I realized that family is not just about blood, but about true bonds. And that life always gives us the right people when we stop begging for affection. I was no longer anyone's shadow. I was a light in the lives of those who wanted me around. I even started dreaming again, something I had forgotten. Dreaming of traveling, of learning something new, of visiting places I've never seen. It didn't have to be far. It didn't have to be expensive. It just had to be mine, chosen by me, with a taste of novelty. It was as if I had reopened the drawers of hope. And within them, I found pieces of the woman I've always been. At night, before going to sleep, I would look at the candle I always light. It flickered calmly, illuminating the silent room. It was no longer a symbol of waiting, but of presence. My presence, whole, reconstituted, without chains. I whispered to myself, "You got back on your feet." And I slept in peace, knowing that tomorrow was, finally, mine alone. The following month arrived with a different smell in the air. The streets were lit, but for the first time so was I. Not because someone invited me to dinner, but because I prepared my own. I bought fresh fruit, a loaf of oven-baked bread, and a bottle of plain wine. I set the table with a white tablecloth that had been kept for years, waiting for a special occasion. And I thought, if not now, when would it be? I lit a candle in the center of the table and let the flame illuminate my face. There were no expensive gifts, no noise from relatives vying for space. There was silence, but a different silence, warm, welcoming. I ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a royal banquet. The flavor did not come from the seasoning, but from the freedom that seasoned the night. And I realized that this was finally my real Christmas. As I toasted alone, I remembered Christmases of old, of the out-of-tune songs, the smell of French toast, Maria's laughter. Everything seemed so distant, but also so alive inside me. I felt she was there, invisible, smiling in front of the lit candle. And I thought that maybe she had always wanted to see me like this, whole. Not dependent, not forgotten, just my own person. I took out my notebook and wrote a few lines. Family is who stays. Love is who respects. A present is being at peace. The words came out easily, as if they were already ready in the heart. I closed the notebook and smiled, because I didn't need an audience to validate them. It was my truth, simple and without makeup. And that night, the truth was enough. Outside, I heard fireworks bursting in the sky. The children laughed, the neighbors toasted, and the city vibrated. But inside my house, the sound was different, that of serenity. I didn't need applause, nor public forgiveness, nor a spectacle. I only needed myself, my courage, my company. And it was enough to fill the entire room with light. I lay down on the couch after dinner and stared at the ceiling. The shadows of the candle danced on the walls, like memories playing. Every movement seemed to tell me, "You made it through." And I knew I was right. I had walked through the fire and come out in one piece. There was no greater victory than being at peace with one's own history. And in that peace, I fell asleep with a light heart. At dawn, the sun came in through the light curtains I chose. The golden light touched my face like a silent blessing. I got up slowly, without haste, without weight. I made fresh coffee and served it in my favorite cup. And as I drank, I thought, this is the gift that no one can take away. The gift of belonging to me. That morning, I tidied the house like someone tidying an altar. New flowers in the vase, the tablecloth washed, the dishes put away. Life went on simple, but with a different flavor. There was no luxury, but there was meaning in every detail. And I realized I didn't need anything else, because real Christmas had already happened inside me. Before I went for my walk, I looked at the unlit candle from the night before. I touched the glass affectionately, silently thanking him. The flame had gone out, but the light remained within me. And I realized it wasn't just a date, but a rebirth. A closed cycle, a lesson learned, a life rebuilt. And for the first time, I wished myself a Merry Christmas. On the street, people carried bags, toasted, and exchanged gifts. I just walked lightly, like someone who had already received everything they needed. They were not goods, nor favors, nor false smiles. It was respect, it was peace, it was dignity. And as the sun shone high, I thought, no one can steal the Christmas that blossoms within a free soul. Over time, I realized that the distance between us wasn't just physical. It was a wall built by harsh words, by forced silences, by choices. I walked around the house and felt the echo of that absence. Every corner still held memories of the boy who once ran there. But now, this boy seemed like a distant stranger, and the longing was mixed with a silent relief. Sometimes the neighborhood would bring me news of him. "I saw your son downtown. He looked worried." Or else, "He walks silently, dejected." I listened, thanked, but didn't comment. It wasn't a lack of love, it was protection of my own heart. Because each piece of news came with a wound that I didn't want to reopen. On colder nights, loneliness weighed differently. I remembered the noisy dinners, the unimportant arguments. I thought, does he miss it too? Or did the distance become a comfort for him? Questions that echoed in the dark, unanswered. And I learned to live with silence as if it were company. I began to understand that loving also means allowing distance, that not every tie can be tightened by force. I needed to respect his choice, even if it hurt me, and in a way, respect myself too, because insisting on forced proximity would be repeating the cycle of wounds. And I wasn't willing to go back to that place. Even so, there were days when I felt a strong sense of longing. The smell of fresh coffee, the sound of old music, a forgotten photograph. Everything brought back the image of him laughing before everything broke. I would clutch my chest, take a deep breath, and let it pass. I learned that longing doesn't kill, but it teaches you to be stronger. And deep down, she also reminded me that there was still love. Some relatives tried to intervene. "You should look for it. Take the first step. It's your obligation." I smiled sadly and replied, my obligation was fulfilled with each bill paid. It wasn't pride. It was just the reality they didn't know. No one saw the sleepless nights, nor the insults disguised as politeness. And no one knew how much it cost to carry that imposed silence. Sometimes I dreamed about him. In my dreams, I was still a child. I still called myself mother tenderly. I woke up with tears in my eyes, confused between past and present. But soon the sun came in through the window and reminded me of real life. And I continued, trying not to get attached to something that would never return. The dream was just a memory, not a promise. Despite the distance, I never stopped praying for him. Each night, as I lit my candle, I whispered your name. Not to ask him to come back, but to ask him to find his way. A child's destiny is not written by the mother's hands. And I had already learned to let go of the reins. But I never stopped sending, in silence, the wish for peace. Time has shown me that distance also has a function. It teaches, matures, heals. It shows that love can exist even without presence, and that sometimes the best act of care is not to get too close. Life goes on, and everyone carries their burdens. Mine was no longer his, and that needed to be respected. So I learned to live with the emptiness by my side. He was no longer an open wound, but a scar that told a story. The longing still came, but it no longer brought me down. It was just part of me, like wrinkles, like memories. And deep down I knew, distance doesn't erase bonds. She just waits for the right time to reveal what can still bloom. As the months passed, I realized that something in me had changed forever. I no longer woke up with the weight of sorrow, nor did I fall asleep with a feeling of debt. My life was finally in my own hands. And every simple gesture, watering plants, making the bed, making my coffee, was celebrated as an intimate victory. I had closed the cycle, and now I walked lightly. The memories still came, of course, but they were no longer chains, they were just stories. Stories I could revisit without drowning in them. I remembered the boy running in the yard, his youth, my sacrifices. All of this now felt like learning, not regret. It was like reading a book that no longer hurt me, it just taught me. I learned to choose who deserved to be by my side. No longer out of obligation, but out of true affinity. The invitations I accepted, the people I welcomed into my home, the hugs I returned. Everything was filtered through the respect I finally demanded. I discovered that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's choice. And that freedom was the greatest gift I could give myself. On the following Christmas Eves, I lit my candle without expecting visitors. The flame reflected off the window pane and lit up my silent room. But there was no longer any sadness in that silence. There was peace, there was serenity, there was pride. Because real Christmas wasn't on other people's tables. He blossomed within me, year after year. My son still showed up from time to time, not with demands, but with more humble eyes. The conversations were short but sincere. There was no magical reconciliation, no cinematic embrace. There were only small steps, made of respect. And I already considered that enough. The newspaper, the gossip, the sidelong glances from the neighborhood, everything lost its power. None of this defined who I was anymore. What defined me were my choices, my restored dignity. I was not the villainous mother, nor the sacrificial martyr. She was just a woman who learned to say enough. And that enough had changed the course of my story. Some days, I would walk to church just to give thanks. He didn't ask for anything more, he didn't beg for change. I was just grateful for the hard but necessary path. Because it was in the weight of ingratitude that I discovered my own strength. And deep down I knew, without that pain, I would not have been reborn. Life sometimes needs to break down to teach you how to rebuild. I rediscovered within myself the woman that Maria always believed I would be. Strong but serene. Strict but loving. A woman who knows the value of her own presence. And that doesn't need applause to feel whole. When I looked in the mirror, I saw wrinkles, but I also saw history. And every line on my face was a scar of victory. One day, while tidying up the bookshelf, I found the blue folder. I opened it slowly, leafing through each receipt, each piece of evidence saved. I smiled and thought, I don't need you guys anymore. I put everything in a bigger box, sealed it with tape, and left it in the attic. Because now those tests were just past. The present no longer needed them. At that moment, I truly understood what a closed cycle is. It's not about forgetting, erasing, or pretending it didn't happen. It is looking back without pain. It is walking forward without fear. It's about belonging again, whole, after losing yourself so much. And as the sun came in through the window, I felt free. Free to live, free to be, free to finally rest in peace. And now I ask you who have listened to me this far, how many times have you kept quiet so as not to lose someone? How many times have you sacrificed your dreams, your money, your peace, only to be rejected in the end? Is it worth insisting in places where there is only ingratitude? Or has the time come for you, like me, to stand up and say enough is enough? Life has taught me that love is not captivity, it is a choice. And respect is not asked for on one's knees, it is imposed with firm actions. Today, I move forward in peace, not because I forgot what happened, but because I learned to choose myself first. What about you? Have you ever thought about whether you are trapped by chains that you yourself maintain? If this story touched you, leave your comment. I want to know how far she went and what she awakened within you. Please enjoy this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because only then will you continue to receive stories that make us reflect on life and ourselves. Ultimately, no one emerges from these lessons unscathed, and perhaps that's exactly what we need.